I released my coaches rankings a few months ago. Those are available over on the national channel, everyone. Actually had a conversation with Steve Days of Michigan Podcast, who brought me on this week to respond to his coaches rankings, and which were remarkably close to mine, especially since he has a rigid metric system that he and I just kind of eyeball it and put it into context. Cam and I had a conversation here last week concerning Mario Cristobal, who, of course, has 12 wins and 13 losses on his resume at Miami, but that is not the full story. So, Cam, you ran into another conversation this week regarding Mario Cristobal's resume and trajectory at Miami.
Yeah. Before I get there, I just want to say that, a lot of times that people come to similar conclusions, even taking different paths there. I worked with a young lady who was a philosophy major at Miami. We worked together in the tutoring office, and she wanted me to look at her final senior thesis. And long story short, she wrote 18 pages of really well-reasoned analysis and personal stories and anecdotes and everything. And you know what her conclusion was? I think, therefore I am. And I was like, oh, cool. I didn't know I was working with Rene Descartes. And she was like, what? And I was like, we've seen, but like, she took her own journey. Like, she didn't even reference it. She hasn't read any, but like, got to that same place. So I say that to say that, hey, we have so much knowledge base that's together where even if we take different paths, you can get to similar kind of, conclusions and thoughts. So maybe that's what happened between the two of you. In terms of the conversation of coaching and whatnot, I saw just posted today, the Canes Insight podcast, my guys D Money and Peter Rees. Shout out to them. They do great work over there. You guys should be reading and following and watching their stuff as well. But in a kind of more polished way, because, this is an organic kind of a show. Like, sometimes we have some topics, but I'm really kind of iterating things live and just kind of, bringing me to the screen and things like that. There will be some times where I do like serious, okay, I've done this research and then I present that kind of stuff. But in that kind of buttoned up way, D Money made the same argument about Mario Cristobal that was just put out today that I made last week. And I'm not saying to take credit for it. I'm saying, just like Mark and Steve, great minds think alike, and everybody's like, okay, well, and again, not trying to controvert the fact that he's 12 and 13 in Miami, right? But name the last coach other than Mario Cristobal who won at FIU, especially in spite of Pete Garcia, one of the worst administrators we've seen in the world of athletics pretty much ever. And again, putting guys into the league, right? And I know, look, it's FIU. I'm not saying that it was, oh yeah, he won every championship in the world for 27 years. But if you get that program to the level of success that he did, Mario Cristobal, when he was there, that is noteworthy. When you then take that and then step up to Oregon and have the success that he had there, that is noteworthy. And it is still on his resume, even with 2 seasons at Miami that have not had the success that everybody might want. And I know we are looking, and especially on here, I have spoken about Mario Cristobal being a dogged recruiter, looking at the rankings and saying, okay, the years that he's had full cycles, it's been top 10. I'm sorry, top 8, because it was like 8 and 5 or 8 and 4 the last 2 years. Like, we know all of that. But the point that I made last week that D Money and Pete made released today, at least to my eyes, is that, do not overlook the success that Mario Cristobal has had on the field for a little bit of recency bias. And again, I'm not saying that the bad things didn't happen. I'm not saying that the Georgia Tech shenanigans didn't happen. They did. Also, P.S., by the way, the Georgia Tech athletic department trolled Miami about there being the kneel down feature, the victory formation in the college football video game. Like, even their athletic department is like, they even know they shouldn't have won that game. And again, just like the 2016 Notre Dame Fighting Irish that went 4-8 and everybody can make fun of, but not Miami because we were one of the teams that lost to them, right? There's nothing that we can say to controvert. If they're talking crap about having beaten a Georgia Tech, from last year, look, that's true and happened. But do not let that overshadow the entire body of work that we've seen from Mario Cristobal. This is a man who knows how to coach football. There are still areas for development, which we've talked about in terms of game operations, right? I mean, hello, if you're talking about game operations, Georgia Tech right there, right? But remember, I have written in The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. We've come on here and talked about all of these early half timeouts in the first and third quarters, right? First quarter, you can recover from that. But the third quarter early timeouts, those started to go away. Instead of overstepping, in my eyes, a little bit his coordinators, fell back a little bit. What happened? Lance Guidry, bang, bang. Perfect play calls twice against Clemson. We win that game because there's a fourth down stop and a fourth down stop in overtime, right? So you start to see these things. And when you look at the entire picture, you see a coach who's very successful, a coach who's demonstrated his knowledge and ability to get teams to a top level. It is taking a little bit longer than we would like, because obviously you would not have wanted a losing season in the first year and then like a barely winning season last year. All of that is true and understood. But the point that I'm making, and the point that D-Money and Pete made, is like, this is like, when you look at Mario Cristobal as a coach, I think that people are zoomed all the way in to a singular square of like a collage mural, right? You know, one of those ones that's like it's multiple colors or multiple pictures put together, but then it looks like one thing when you look right here. But then when you step back and you look, you say, oh, that's a portrait of Martin Luther King, or that's a beautiful landscape, or whatever it is. When I step back from the singular point, right, and then I look at the entire picture, I think that people are looking at a single point too much with Mario Cristobal. And that was the point that I made, the point that D-Money also made. So, like, yeah, I think that, and I get it. Like, it doesn't feel good to lose games. It didn't feel good to lose to Rutgers in that bowl game. It didn't feel good for Kyle Mungungai to run 97 times for 437 yards. Their quarterback, who's like very much just a guy and transferred somewhere else, you know, it didn't feel good. So I get why people would push back and say, well, yeah, the last thing that I saw from Mario didn't make me feel good. Cam, you were so pissed in the post-game press conference after Georgia Tech, you didn't even answer a question. Oh, sorry, you didn't even ask a question for fear of what might have come out of your mouth. True story. I was fucking pissed. And I just sat there staring daggers, and I was beside myself. And I admit that. But that was a single point. That was a single square of the collage, not the entirety. And I think and hope that, well, I think you're going to see the trajectory that we've been on continue this year, and Mario lead this team and program to a level of success that he is yet to have here, which is kind of a low bar because, 7-6 ain't much, to shake a stick at, and, that we haven't had in a while. But to think it is impossible, I think, is foolhardy, because we've seen him be successful in other places. And I shared that. I saw D-Money, had that same kind of a conversation. So, yeah, again, not taking credit for what he said, because, again, a very smart guy, he's a lawyer, all these kind of things, right? But just like Mark, in the lead-up conversation, great minds can come to the same conclusion, even if you have a different path there. And I think that is what we're seeing regarding Mario Cristobal. And yeah, I mean, hopefully we're able to come back, after the season and say, hey, told you so. But, obviously games got to get played, and we'll see.
So I'll go a few different directions on this. So the sack statistic comes to mind. So when you see a player who's got a certain number of sacks, is it all about just that particular statistic? Meaning that there are some numbers that are indicators of other numbers. So if a player has 12 sacks and another player has 5 sacks over the course of 12 or 13 games played and all those plays, is that significant? It could be, depending on the situation in which those plays were made. However, what it's an indication, if it's extrapolated, is that that player that gets 12 sacks probably got a hand in the face of the quarterback, or was bringing him down, or forced overthrows, or did all these other things, because he's consistently getting pressure on the quarterback that produced 12 sacks, but also produced probably 40 or 50 plays in which he impacted the play, as opposed to the player with 5 sacks. So in the case of Mario Cristobal, yes, there is one major gaffe. So if this was Nick Saban and somehow he lost his mind and made this gaffe, we may think, what in the world happened there? With Mario Cristobal, and it's not in any way, I'll make this clear, at least based on my evaluation, a Les Miles situation where I used to have regular content 3 or 4 times a year to say, look at what Les Miles did on Saturday. There was 137 on the clock, and he didn't know that, and you could add, and it was a train wreck like 3 times the season. With Mario Cristobal, it's kind of similar to James Franklin at Penn State. He's really good at his job in so many other ways. Does James Franklin have just obvious gaffes in his game management? No, but football smart, savvy people look at some of the way he's approached and prepared teams and handled games to say that really wasn't the best route there. And the two things for Mario Cristobal with me would simply be, if you go back to Oregon, and of course we're speaking to a Miami audience, so there's a different perspective here. And I'm sure that there are some people, whether they're verbally shouting at their phone right now to say, Cam, we don't care what he did at Oregon. Yeah, he won a couple of Pac-12 championships and won a Rose Bowl. What's he going to do here? We only care what he did, what he's going to do here. But are we evaluating the coach? Then the Oregon resume is important. Yes, we know you're Miami fans and you want to see it here. So the indicators would be, well, if he's capable of that kind of gaffe, and certainly you have been eloquent in pointing out the misuse of timeouts and how that was an issue and has become far less of an issue. The situation at Oregon that seems, again, there's not much data here, but there's a connection in which Oregon was playing for a Pac-12 championship a couple of years ago. They played Utah late in the season and they got drubbed. We're talking like 38-7. Critical game. Well, it wasn't so critical that it kept them out of the Pac-12 championship game, because lo and behold, 2 or 3 weeks later, they're playing that same Utah team in Vegas for the Pac-12 championship. They got drubbed again, almost the exact score. And it's just kind of curious as to, wow, you would think that those players, and we know this isn't a situation where Clemson of old was playing Georgia Tech in the ACC champion. You know, when they used to like bury the Coastal Division winner every year. No, these were very two comparable teams. And if anything, Oregon might have had the more talented team. And here they are 2 or 3 weeks later, just based on motivation and getting your team ready to play emotionally and psychologically, you would think that they would have performed better. And I think football people are pretty much in agreement that the team that lost the first matchup has a psychological advantage if they're a confident, prepared team, but also has an advantage of schematically correcting what they did wrong versus the other team thinking, okay, do what we did the first time because that worked? Or do we try to over scheme and overthink this going into the second matchup? And so that's a bit of a concern. Again, I don't want to blow it out of proportion because it was one situation, but to get blown out a second time against Utah in the span of a month was, again, I don't want to blow it out of proportion, so I won't call it alarming, but it's a data point.
True, heard. I also think that that was like the perfect storm of cycles of your programs, because before that, Mario Cristobal's Oregon team had kicked the dog mess out of Utah repeatedly for years. Like Utah was like, you know, the little brother who finally lands one against the big, or like, you know, the little cousin who finally lands one against the big cousin, and was like, yeah, but they had to take time because, like, yeah, Oregon was the big dog in that with Mario Cristobal out there, right? They won by 20 something points a couple years in a row before that. But yes, true, I hear you that, yeah, they did lose. It was 38-7 and 38-10. You know, so yeah, pretty much similar scores. But at a certain point, hey, like the way that they're built and the way that they do things right now, they got us this year. They just do, right? And that happens. But to your point of Miami fans clearly wanting the success, that Mario had elsewhere to happen here, that speaks to my exact point, right? You've seen the success that you desire with this person happen somewhere else. That's why you're saying, hey, we want to see that here. Well, we don't care that you do care that it happened somewhere else. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been really bought into getting rid of Manny Diaz to bring Mario in here, to be perfectly freaking honest. So, like, we just need to admit that to ourselves collectively. There are a couple super chats from Mohammed in there, and as Mark goes to find them, I'm not going to disagree with you. If Muhammad says, for me, Cam, it's not about his record here only. It's how he's gotten to the record. His on-field game day has left a lot to be desired. He's been horrible on game day for 2 years. I hear you, brother. I agree. And we've talked about that, like, on this channel. I've written it on State of the U. Like, yes, things need to get better. And it's not only about that, right? It's not only about the record, but the process as well. I hear you, right? But again, to the point, we've seen the process and the results meet and exceed our expectations elsewhere. And that's where hopefully things are going to go, while still being able to be critical of what happened, but not being singularly pointillistic about it and saying, okay, well, this is the entirety of this person, of this coach. There is nothing else that is potentially possible or anything. I don't necessarily think that'd be true. Why? Because again, we've seen him have success at these other places. So both things can be true. He has been successful in the past to the level of, not national championship, but, conference championships, Rose Bowl, things like that, division championships, playing for multiple Pac-12, when that existed, championship games and things like that. But that has not happened here. And so, yes, we can both celebrate or look towards the North Star of the successes that did happen elsewhere, and also be critical of the process and results currently, as we hopefully push to develop the program or watch Mario develop the program, because we're outside, he's inside, but watch that development happen to obtain the success that we've seen elsewhere. So yeah, we've seen Oregon blowing people out. We've seen them play for all of these type of things with him at the helm, and he needs to dial that kind of coaching and leadership and guidance in to have that happen here. 100% agree. I'm not hand waving anything that has happened at all, but just saying we need to look at everything that he's done as part of the evaluative process. Not only the fact that for 2 years it has not met our estimation, and during those 2 years, to your point, his on-field operations have left much to be desired. But even with that being the case, I respectfully submit that we have seen positive growth along that path. And especially, I think that bringing in Lance Guidry and Shannon Dawson last year, after 1 year here with other coordinators, they thought that was going to go differently in my head, from Hitch. Like, yeah, I saw that going differently. Cool. So what we're going to do is change that out, bring in some other guys, and then make that different that was in my head happen. So there are steps along that path. But again, a small step is still a step, and there are still miles to go. But I believe that we're marching in the direction that we need to be going.
So ultimately, all that matters are the wins and losses and what the record is and the championships. But I believe we're still at a stage, having only gone through 2 to 3 recruiting cycles, in which the trajectory can also be evaluated outside of the win-loss record. If we were 7 years into this and Mario Cristobal is racking up top 5 recruiting classes and going 7-5 every year, there'd be like, okay, well, there's this obvious disconnect that regardless, Texas, Charlie Strong, Tom Herman, Texas, top 5, 8 classes coming in year after year. Oh, we're still going 5-7. What's 7-5, 5-7? What's going on here? This is not what, but we're still at a stage in which I believe, this is all opinion, that, okay, the trajectory of the recruiting should be taken into context and consideration to say, he's not had time to show whether that's going to come to fruition on the field and equal wins and championships.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that. And I don't think that we're in that place, but you know, Georgia traded top 10 recruiting classes and 9-3. 10-2 is a standard with Mark Richt. They said that's not good enough. We need top 3 or top 1 recruiting classes and national championships. That's where we should go. And like, again, as a Michigan man, I saw the push for that before happen with Lloyd Carr. And we said 9-3 is not good enough. Thanks so much. We're going to bring somebody, and it took Nahon 15, 20 years, right, to go through multiple staffs and multiple coaches and finally get Harbaugh and then go through the process, because it took him a while till he beat the Acorns, right, till Michigan got there, right? That was not a given that you remove Mark Richt, bring in somebody else, and it hits that level of performance. It did, right? And like, good on them for it. They saw that they had a window. They put everything in with that. I don't think that we're in a point yet with Mario of Mario being analogous to Richt, where we're having top 8 classes every year going, because we haven't won 9 games yet. So like 9-3 is the floor. We're definitely not there. But it was for many, many moons before they finally said, good isn't good enough. You know what I mean? But I think that we are hopefully ascending, and the situation and circumstance is there for this year to be a major step forward season for the Hurricanes.